Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a book review of Stolen Focus by Johann, which is a book on attention. And I think that, unpacking Johann style a little bit might be helpful. I reviewed his other two books on this channel. The first one, Chasing the Scream, is about drug addiction. And the second one, which is Lost Connections, I believe, it might be Missed Connections. This one's on depression. And what he does, he largely takes kind of a social, he problematizes things generally on a broader social sort of level, where he looks at institutional and structural issues related to a thing. He often weaves in a sort of narrative structure into his work, and then cites very heavily a ton of evidence and a ton of different perspectives. And I really like it a lot because it tends to be very information dense while not being as heavy, I suppose, is an adjective you could use to describe stuff that tends to be really information dense, and you still kind of get a sort of narrative flow. Chasing the Scream on drug addiction, he largely makes the argument that the war on drugs is ineffective and attacks, the notion of this like hook theory of drugs, where the drugs kind of sink in their hooks, and then it's just completely physiological. He argues that, there's a lot of other issues driving addiction, and he cites, a lot of stuff as to why he believes that. Very, very strong theme being throughout is he talks about how ineffective prohibition was, and prohibition led to organized crime and these sorts of things. And so it really doesn't look that good when you look at prohibition. And then for missed or lost connections, he writes that he makes the argument that depression is largely a social issue, and that we have, what we are missing out on is various connections, whether it's to other people, meaningful work, nature, there's a lot of things he writes. I believe there's 9 connections, can't recall them all off the top of my head, but he paints it mainly as a social issue and goes after pharmaceutical companies or this sort of, biochemical narrative that is kind of, along those lines. And so he's going after these social things. He cites a bunch of evidence, and then we have this thing on attention, which is what Stolen Focus is. Now, attention is an area of, a ton of interest for me, and so to some degree, it's difficult for me to talk about what he talks about in this book because I've read so much on attention. I've written an unpublished book on attention that it's kind of a little hard to cross the streams or in this sort of thing, and a lot of the information in here I've already read before, but I do really like the narrative structure and the way he introduces it. I think if I were to recommend any book on attention, and this is normally I do recommendations at the end, if I were to recommend any single book on attention, this might be the book. Not because it's necessarily comprehensive or provides a really good model, but it's super readable and it covers a ton of information and it covers a lot of things I think are useful, and I think it does it in a measured way. We're going to go through some of the chapters one at a time a little bit, and talk about, I'll talk just very, very briefly on the chapters, and then after this we'll get into the ratings as well as maybe talk a little bit more on recommendations. So the first chapter is titled, pulling out the book right now, obviously, Cause 1, the increase in speed, switching, and filtering. And so what he discusses is that, what we do now in terms of our attention is we are constantly switching what we're focusing on. We get a buzz, we check our phone, and every time we do this, we lose out on a ton of, it takes a lot of brain power or, concentration to change tasks. And the fact that we have so many things grasping at our attention and, taking us off course and this sort of thing, this is a problem because it reduces our efficacy and our ability to, attack problems and this sort of thing. And he notes that it's not just because of social media and it's not just because of the internet. This has been happening since it has been started to be measured in, I believe, the 20s, if I recall correctly. And so that's, he sets the stage that there's this sort of increasing load on attention. It's there's a framework that I like to think of that he doesn't invoke in here, but it's a little bit talking about economics. In the Industrial Revolution we had a things economy. And then, kind of in the mid 20th century, 1950s to 1980s, we became an information economy where knowing how to organize, your structures and this sort of thing became supremely useful. And so information is what was useful. And then after that, following that, we've become an attention economy. There's so much information out there that the throttle by which you have to pay attention, that is, the primary thing that is the limiting factor now. the information's free. It's all out there. But what's the limiting factor is our ability to attend to all the information that's available, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. And so in this way, there are more and more, kind of grasps and vies for our attention, especially because the incentive structure, which we'll get into this later, of all the media companies that run social media and all these sorts of things, YouTube as well, is just keeping us engaged as long as possible, because that's how you generate the maximum amount of ad revenue. It is not they are not principally motivated by creating good outcomes from the user. They are motivated by increasing engagement. But let's continue on. By the way, the structure of that is addiction, which relates back to his first book. Cause 2, the crippling of our flow states. So he goes into, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but he talks about how, the state of flow is one in which we get a lot of information done, and how our ability to enter flow is contingent on our ability to attend to something, one singular thing, for a long period of time. He cites this guy who's really big in the information thing, but his name is Michael, and then, or Mihail, it might be Mikhail, and then depending on the translation, it might be Michael, and then it's this thing I can't pronounce. It starts with a C, very long name, but what this guy argues is that, if we're constantly being interrupted, then we don't have an opportunity to enter a flow state, where you feel a sense of mastery. And Johann Hari argues that, one of the things that's essential to feeling satisfied or feeling competent as a human being is this feeling of mastery. And if we never have enough attention or ability to attend to something long enough to feel this state of flow, then it's going to be impossible to, get this feeling of mastery. And so, to some extent, it's cutting us off from, a source of something that is, integral in terms of the human experience, by just being constantly engaged by all these things that are really good at engaging us, which we'll get into a little bit. And so let's go chapter 3, cause 3, the rise of physical and mental exhaustion. This is a theme throughout the book. He talks about the importance of sleep and how diminished sleep, creates problems. He also talks about the increased, workload overall, over the course of several decades, and how this is, definitely an difficulty in terms of attention, because if you lose sleep and your sleep's not as good, you actually can't pay attention as well. And there's other books on sleep, I think Why We Sleep by, I want to say Matthew Walker, but I'm not sure if it's Matthew Walker. Very good, but they're one of those things that was if you lose sleep, the equivalent of having to attend to a baby that's crying in the middle of the night, you lose it's 40 or 60% of your ability to lay down new memories. So if you're trying to learn, or you're trying to change, or you're trying to develop a skill, that's huge. But then, Johann Hari, on top of this, is giving this idea that it's harder to pay attention, so it's harder to enter these flow states. And so, okay. Chapter 4, cause 4, the collapse of sustained reading. Now, he does, in terms of the narrative structure of this book, he talks about, first, this trip he made, to, I forget where it was. It was somewhere in the Midwest. One second, I'm going to pause for loud cars. Okay, by the Midwest, I meant the Northeast. And it's this small port town that he went to, and he, takes away, gives up all of his phone, his internet access, his computer, all of this. He brings a computer that has no internet access, something like this. And part of the narrative is him, getting rid of the technology, and then, struggling with the getting rid of it. And he weaves this in throughout the chapters, and this is, ongoing. But in it, he talks about how he has difficulty just sitting down and trying to, read something for a sustained period of time. And, I'm of the opinion, as someone who reads a lot, I think there's a lot of bias here. Johann Hari, he's obviously an author. He wrote a book. He thinks reading and writing is good. I'm doing a book review here on YouTube. Obviously, I think that reading is good, and so here we are. And so to some extent, perhaps you could take this with a grain of salt, but he does talk about the importance of reading, and how one thing that I found particularly striking about this chapter, one thing that he mentioned, was that there's actually, people process information differently when they read on a screen than when they read on paper, which, shout out to not reading on a Kindle. And what he noted was that, or what the study noted, was that people, when they are reading on a Kindle, will tend to scan, or not, I shouldn't say Kindle, when they're reading on a screen. The study said screen, not Kindle. I don't know if Kindle's an exception because it's a particular type of screen. But when people read on a screen, they tend to skim and just kind of skip over things and just trying to get the meat out as quickly as possible. So they are just, in terms of the metaphor we used earlier, they are turning the fire hose up and making the consumption of information happen faster. And when you do it with reading on a page, you don't tend to do that, and you tend to pay better attention to the thing you are reading. And one of the things he argues is the ability to pay attention to a long form argument as it is structured in a linear way, while you are reading, this is somewhat lost. He makes another argument that there's kind of this fall in this ability of people to empathize with other people for two reasons. One of them is an interesting statistic that he kind of cites regarding the reading, which is that you actually get better at empathizing with others by reading reading fiction. Nonfiction actually doesn't help with this because it forces you to imagine the experience of another and to simulate their experience while you are reading from their perspective. So I found that very interesting. But also, all of our interactions with others, or increasingly our interactions with others, are mediated through technology and by technology rather than being facilitated, in terms of lived experience with these people. And to some extent, this bleeds into a point in the later chapter, which is that social media companies are not incentivized to actually get people to meet up together. This is something they could do very easily, but that doesn't increase their ad revenue. That would increase our ability to connect with other human beings. Shout out to his second book, Lost Connections. But that's not what is incentivized for these companies. These companies make money as long as people are engaged for as long as possible, right? Because that's how they generate ad revenue. It might be better for us to end up meeting up with a friend, and there's mechanisms you could have to meet up with a friend, in these media companies, but there's no incentive because they don't get paid based on how fulfilled you are as a human being. And so I forget what exactly the point was for bringing up that tangent, but we'll get back to, kind of just reading through this. The collapse of sustained reading. Okay, so chapter 5, he talks about cause 5, the disruption of mind wandering. And this one I found really fascinating, which is he makes the argument, and I can't remember too many of the studies from this one just off the top of my head, but he makes the argument that a very important part of being able to think creatively, and there are studies that back this up, is that you have to be able to sit in a space while not having there being tons of demands on your attention. And so, going on a long walk while you are not being addressed by all this stimulus, for example, and having time for your mind to wander allows you to be more creative, and the world we're living in now, where we're just constantly being stimulated by those dopamine spins when we're rolling through social media and this type of stuff, or clicking through various videos on YouTube, this sort of thing. This decreases our ability to let our mind wander. I think he cites some of the studies on meditation, which show that being able to sit alone and just not be stimulated and sit in that experience is an important thing. There's a lot of studies on meditation on how it decreases anxiety and these types of stuff that are fairly robust. I'm not sure the sample sizes, I can't remember, but also I don't think he cites all of those, but this is something that he mentions, and it was something that I had not been aware of before reading this book as a sort of thing. Although there's this guy who got this eureka moment for this major scientific discovery he had been doing for 20 years. He got the eureka moment when he was completely unengaged from the science, which was interesting. And this is cited in some other books as well, and Hari cites it in this chapter. Cause 6, the rise of technology that can track and manipulate you. And here he leans heavily in on Tristan Harris, talking with him, who is a pretty, in my opinion, big player in the attention game as it relates to social media. He worked for Google, and he was eventually in charge for the ethics department at Google. I forget exactly what it's called, but he eventually left because the problem is the incentive structure of these companies is such that there can be it promotes only engagement, not fulfillment. And so he eventually left and founded Center for Humane Technology, and his main thrust, or his main argument, is that social media is just it's only bent on appropriating our attention. Now, if you were interested in like this type of arguments, these types of things, in particular the social dilemma, the documentary on Netflix, this was done by Tristan Harris, or in part with Tristan Harris, and I thought was fantastic, and would be the fastest introduction to those types of thoughts. So checking that out is probably better than me just kind of rattling it off the top of my head, even though I'm somewhat tempted to. But it's pervasive theme throughout the book is that the broader social issue that Hari argues for is, actually addressing this in terms of societal change and regulating these companies such that they, can't harvest our information, because what they do is they create a sort of voodoo doll, and they aggregate like the information on you, and what this voodoo doll does is it just predicts exactly what's going to get you to just continue to pay attention to that screen, in the form of first taking your data to construct the doll and then getting increasing amounts of feedback. And the only purpose is creating engagement, not fulfillment. And if you're just constantly engaged, you never reach any of those flow states. There's there's a passage I'm going to pull up. Okay, I almost used this quote for the splash, but here it is. The truth is creepier. It's not that they are listening and then they can... You've heard the phone... So the phenomenon where you think your phone's listening to you because it gives you an ad immediately after something you were talking about. This is what this quote is addressing or talking about. The truth is creepier. It's not that they are listening and then they can do targeted ad serving. It's that their model of you is so accurate that it's making predictions about you that you think are magic. So the algorithm is so good at predicting what you are interested in, it doesn't even have to hear you, which is actually substantially worse than someone actually listening in. There's also this anecdote. It's not referenced in the book. I'm not sure how true it is, but the girl who didn't even know she was pregnant started getting a bunch of ads for baby stuff, and her parents got very mad or something like this at the company servicing her ads, and lo and behold, it turns out that the girl's pregnant. But there's another passage here that kind of sums up some of the ideas in this chapter, or rather the next chapter as well. At the moment, they said, social media is designed to grab your attention and sell it to the highest bidder, but it could be designed to understand your intentions and to help you achievement. Then later in another paragraph, there's a fundamental clash between your interests: to be able to focus, to have friends you see offline, and to be able to discuss things calmly, and the interests of social media companies. And the interest in social media companies. This is in clash with these interests. With the introduction of a ban on surveillance capitalism and a move to a different business model, that clash ends. As Tristan put it, you'd be paying for the interests to be aligned between you and the product you use. So, for example, if you just paid a subscription service to Facebook, they would not be incentivized to keep you on the platform as long as possible. They'd actually be incentivized to have you get the most out of the platform. And that's kind of, that was actually from, what is it, Cause 6, the rise of technology that can track and manipulate you. So this is 2 chapters that's really the same issue. And then that was a little bit, I think, from chapter 9, the first glimpses of a deeper solution, where he proposes both the banning. But before that, in chapter 8, he talks about something that he largely actually leans on another author who we've reviewed a book on, which I believe the book was Indistractable by Nir Eyal, and that's Cause 7, The Rise of Cruel Optimism, which is a concept I haven't heard before, but it's... I don't feel necessarily fully qualified to explain the cruel optimism, but the idea is kind of something like this. Someone says, don't you worry, all you have to do is XYZ problems and XYZ things and you can solve the problem. You just have to, I wish I could come up with a really good example, but what Nir Eyal gives a ton of different sort of directives that you can do to help, help your attention and become indistractable, as it were. But he's also, and Johann Hari seems very critical of this, he's also written a book on how companies can sink their hooks in and get you addicted like it's a drug. And the title of their other book is Not Indistractable, is just very hook-sinky-y, and it's what Johann Hari argues is that these individualistic solutions that Nir Eyal proposes in his book Indistractable are of the sort that it's not really a fair playing field you're playing with these companies, these social media companies, because they have, thousands of people working on things that are entirely designed to just keep you engaged as long as possible. And you got other stuff to do, right? It's not like you are wholly committed entirely to resisting these things that are just basically dopamine machines. And so it's a bit of cruel optimism that to say, hey, all you have to do is XYZ intervention, and then you get to, no problem. You get to deal with your attention problem. And so he kind of attacks this individualistic solution on some fronts of the things that are proposed by Nir Eyal, but he also endorses some of the things like there's this product that makes it so you put your phone in a box and the box won't open for 2 hours. So obviously it's a form of pre-commitment, which he endorses throughout the book. So that's kind of, we get some of that stuff in those chapters, and then kind of we're coming home stretch here. Chapter 10, Cause 8, the surge in stress and how it's triggering vigilance. He makes the argument that we're more stressed out. I really don't remember this argument too well, but that what we are in is a sort of flight or a fight or flight response more often. And when you're in a fight or flight response, you can't actually attend to stuff that's important to you. You can't get the mind wandering thing. You can't get the flow. These sorts of things, kind of building on previous chapters, and that constant stress is more of a thing that is common in today's society than it was, like, let's say 50 years ago. I believe he'll tie in a fair amount with social media, but I don't recall exactly. So chapter 11, the places that figured out how to reverse the surge in speed and exhaustion. I actually have no recollection of this chapter, to be honest. Chapter 12, the causes 9 and 10 are deteriorating diets and pollution. So these ones, he talks about how both chemical, like contaminant stuff that's in our food, and pollution, these are much more social and structural issues, how these can actually cause attentional problems. He mentions Michael Pollan, who we've reviewed, I think one or two of his nutrition books. Big fan of him on nutrition, but he talks about him how people don't really eat real food anymore. Real food that would be recognized as food by your grandmother is kind of the easiest heuristic you could use. So this is talking more about broader kind of social issues. Cause 11, the rise in ADHD and how we are responding to it. It's going to be a lot about that. I think that one's somewhat self-explanatory. Chapter 14, Cause 12, and the confinement of our children, both physically and psychologically. So this one, he talks quite a little bit about education and how attention relates to education and these sorts of things. I'm not going to cite some of these arguments because this is starting to get a little bit long, but that is kind of it. And then his conclusion is attention rebellion, where he kind of says, hey, the individualistic solutions are important, but largely this is a broader social issue, and we should treat it as a broader social issue. And so there we have it. And he ties in both regulating the social media companies as well as the diet stuff and the pollutants in the air, these types of things, the broader social problems, etc. Okay, so that's kind of a very quick rundown of the various topics that are in the book, and I quite enjoyed it. So let's get into the ratings. For utility, I gave it a 7.5, not because there are, in particular, a ton of directives or things you can do, but I think that this is an important topic to know about, which is, and I'm wholeheartedly, admittedly biased in this regard, but insofar as I think I can evaluate information and reality of this type of thing, I think attention's, I think that, to be able to do something, you have to be able to attend to it. To be able to, structure and control your own attention, I think is how you gain agency. I come from a philosophy background. I think that, free will, a lot of philosophers don't believe free will exists. I think that you just have to believe in free will, and this is a gross oversimplification of my position, but you just have to believe in free will for a practical solution. But if free will does exist or doesn't exist, the most modest claim you can make regarding free will is your ability to continue to pay attention to something that has entered your attention, because truly you don't really control what enters your attention. If you think, oh, what am I going to eat today, and you think between tacos and burgers, you did not decide for tacos and burgers to enter your idea, and you forgot about mozzarella sticks or whatever, right? If it never enters your attention, you can't properly choose it, but once something does enter your attention, you can continue to attend to it. And so in a sense, attention is a currency for agency, or you can think of it like this if you'd like. Your ability to attend to stuff that is important to you, that is consistent with your values, and then execute that is a form of agency. Or I've made this argument in a few places. If your attention is being appropriated, or there's various external factors that are decreasing your ability to attend to the things that you think are important, this is a big problem. So to that extent that this book addresses a whole ton of those topics, as we mentioned, I think I mentioned 3 or 4 books, entire other books that this thing, like in one of the chapters they talk about, being able to, it's of tremendous utility, I think, to be aware of how the attention game is being played in the background, and how a lot of problems that are modern day problems are the result of various issues that are not necessarily individualistically oriented. Like, a lot of people blame themselves for a variety of things, but there's a lot of societal and structural issues. And this is like the contention that Johann Hari takes with Nir Eyal, the guy who gives a bunch of individualistic solutions, is that like the bootstrapping mentality, it's not that it's like entirely wrong, but it's like if it is improper to blind yourself to the larger societal issues by just blaming the individual for everything. Okay, but I also think it's also sometimes you should just focus on the individual solution even if there is a larger societal problem. But that's like a whole separate different type of argument. But this is the main reason why we're giving it utility, because I think it's something that's really important to know about, or read about, or like at least touch on. And if you didn't want to read this book and you've made it this far in the the book review, I would recommend watching The Social Dilemma, because that's much easier to do than reading an entire book. But for novelty, I gave it an 8.5. Not because a lot of these things are hard to find. Obviously, we found a lot of the information in here before, although some of the things were interesting. There was a really interesting thing about twin studies that I was unaware of, which is that the environment... So often twin studies are used where, they take a look at identical twins raised and how similar they are, and they take a look at non-identical twins raised in the same environment and how similar they are, and identical twins raised apart and how similar they are, and non-identical twins raised apart and how similar they are, and they compare and they control for these various variables. And the whole point is, when you compare how close identical twins are to non-identical twins, or how close the twins are to each other relative to these other twin sets, you can get an idea of how important biology is, because you know exactly the difference in terms of how biologically connected they are. And so the idea is, if you control for biology, you can know whether something is an entirely biologically caused, or if it is caused by societal influence. This is like heavily in the ADHD chapter, but what I found out is they make an interesting argument, and there's a study that kind of shows this. The environments are actually not the same. So when you have identical twins raised in an environment and non-identical twins raised in an environment, the environment that the identical twins are raised in tends to actually be more similar than the environment that the non-identical twins are raised in, because people will treat identical twins more similarly, and so there's a confounding variable in terms of the environment, which this is not something I'd conceptually been aware of, but I found tremendously interesting. Anyways, that's a tangent. Novelty... For novelty, I gave it an 8.5, though, because, we were talking about something interesting that I didn't know, but a lot of this is information that you can find in a lot of places. There are a lot of people blaming, social media for, shortening our attention span, and this causing problems. And so I think that this is one where, the ideas are out there, but I also think it's tremendously important to know. Like, if I were to... These are, like, the two factors that we use to kind of rate stuff on novelty is... How hard is it to find this information, and how important is this information to know? in terms of how important this information is to know, I think I'd give it a 9.5 because I never give anything a 10, and I just like it's not in my bones. But it's a 9.5, which is the highest like possible. And then in terms of how hard is this information to find, well, it's not that hard. So maybe a 7 or an 8 or something like this, and so you get an average of 8.5. For entertainment, I gave it a 7. I think that he does a pretty good job of creating a semi-narrative structure as well as kind of weaving in stories and these types of things in a way that doesn't really detract from the quantity of information, but just kind of blends and weaves with the information in a rather nice way, which is, why he's scoring nicely on both entertainment, on style. For readability, I gave it a 7.5. It's highly readable, but it's also information oriented and is talking about studies. And to the extent that you're talking about studies and being information oriented, you're always going to suffer on readability relative to something that's just a novel, which is perhaps the drawback of this rating system, because it really does. Perhaps I need one for fiction and one for nonfiction, but then that would run into its own set of problems. And then for interest, I gave it a 9. And perhaps this is a little bit inflated for what it would be for the average person, because this is this is the most important. This is the topic I'm just generally most interested in, categorically, attention. And so I obviously am going to find it quite interesting, and so to some extent I suppose you could take it with a grain of salt, which gives an overall score of a 7.83, which is perhaps a little bit higher than I would have given it if I were to just try and give it a raw score, without tabulating the categories, but I don't think it's insane. So this is going to be I think this is the highest rated book, with the exception of a book that shouldn't really be counted, of 2023 that I've read in 2023. By the time I publish this will be 2024, but this is the final book of 2023 and the highest rated. So as far as recommendations go, I would generally recommend this to everyone, which is or anyone who's even remotely interested in the topic of attention. I would recommend this. I guess I would secondarily, someone who doesn't feel comfortable reading this 260 pages, so kind of a normal nonfiction or popular nonfiction science-oriented type of book. It's roughly, or it's 300 pages, but 260 is the actual book, and then you have footnotes and endnotes and these types of stuff, and it goes to 350 in total. I would extremely broadly recommend this. This would probably be the book I'd recommend more broadly than anything else, because I think there's a lot of information in there where it's if you're not aware of it, you should be aware of it, and it's it's one thing to tell people, oh, if you're interested in this, you should read XYZ book. It's another thing to say that you should be interested in this, and if you're not, maybe you should read this book and kind of hear about it. And so I would rate this extraordinarily highly in terms of recommendations. If this book doesn't seem manageable, though, as I was mentioning earlier, I would recommend watching The Social Dilemma, which is the documentary by Tristan Harris, which Johann Hari leans on pretty heavily in terms of ideas in the book for 3 to 4 chapters, all the chapters on social media. I think that would be quite useful. And so that's where it is for the recommendations. Also, as we're kind of outroing this here, if you've been watching YouTube for 2 hours straight, I would just, or 3 or 4 or however long, you're getting what I'm saying, you're picking up what I'm putting down, I would consider or just remind that YouTube is incentivized from you just being engaged to the platform as long as possible, not actually fulfilling sort of creating a sense of fulfillment in the user, because the money they generate through ads is contingent upon just how long you watch, and so maybe get a glass of water, go on a walk, something like this, let your mind wander per information in the book, something to this effect, and you might feel more fulfilled and or better, just kind of as a suggestion going out. Although I used to do the walk, maybe take a walk outros, and I've kind of gotten away from them. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that this book, of all the YouTube book reviews, I hope that this one makes you more interested in the book, and other than that, have a good one.